says he hears a voice saying, "Come up hither," and immediately he is in the Spirit on the Lord's day. There's a transition from Revelation chapters 2 and 3, the church, to chapter 4, which is the scene of the temple in heaven. Now, he says, "I saw a door in heaven open." Now, that word door is a Greek word that means a literal portal or opening, meaning John wasn't just using some kind of symbolic allegory to describe. No. He saw a door. He saw an opening, and he was caught up into that opening. Now, once you pass through the door, then the door is shut. That's why you have in the parable of the 5 wise virgins, they enter into the bridal chamber, and the door is shut. So watch this. Enter into your chambers and shut the doors about thee. Now, why are you entering into your chamber, your secret place, and shutting the door about thee for a little moment till the indignation be past? Now, indignation is a word that is used, Daniel 11:36, representing the indignation of God or the wrath of God or the judgments of God that are going to be poured out on the earth. And he said, hide yourself for a little moment, meaning that this isn't going to last forever. It's for a time period. And if you'll read the Bible, the 7 vials, 7 trumpets, and the 7-seal book, 6 seals, 6 trumpets, and 6 vials totally deal with judgment striking the earth. And so we see that this indignation only lasts for a moment. Then what happens? The Lord returns. And it says God is going to come out of his place to punish the earth for shedding the innocent blood. And you will find that in Revelation 6 when the martyrs say, "How long, O God, will you not avenge us of our blood of those that dwell on the earth?" Revelation 20, souls are beheaded for the testimony which they hold. And Mystery Babylon is judged because she shed the blood of Christ and the blood of the saints and the prophets. So the judgments of the indignation God will send in the tribulation are based on, more than anything else, this is important you understand this, shedding innocent blood. Look at 50 million babies aborted in America. And now we want to know why we're having land problems with water pipes busting in one city with 2 million people out of drinking water. Water on the coast getting polluted by oil. Someone says, "Oh, come on, Perry, this is all natural stuff." Let me tell you, without going into detail, many of the judgments that the angels pour out in the book of Revelation, the 6 trumpets and the 6 vials that are poured out, many of them can be equated to an asteroid, and there will be an asteroid strike the earth in the book of Revelation, volcanic eruptions, which the ash will cover the sky and darken the sun, and tsunamis. Those 3 things people will look at and think it's a natural disaster, but the earth, the Bible said, is groaning and travailing under the weight of the shed blood and the weight of sin. And so the Lord spoke to me. I don't want to get sidetracked here, but this was years and years ago, and I began to tell some partners. The Lord spoke to me and said, when America gets near the level of 50 million aborted babies, God said, I'm going to allow the hedge to come down on parts of the United States, and they're going to see a lot of difficulty that they've never seen before. So what's sad is the politicians of America and even our Supreme Court does not understand the Bible. You cannot shed innocent blood. And so the innocent blood of righteous people, and I believe even children, if you read Matthew 23, Jesus said that Jerusalem would be destroyed because of the blood shed from Abel to Zechariah, whom they slew between the porch and the altar. So in this time of indignation, in the book of Revelation especially, the tribulation, it's about blood being shed in the earth and the blood crying up to God for vengeance. And that's why the earth shakes, the earth quakes, and the terrible things happen, because Paul said the earth is in travail waiting to be delivered. So when you read, let me say this, when you read again Isaiah chapter 26, verses 19 through verse 21, it absolutely tells you that when the dead are raised, that the righteous are going to go into a chamber and be hidden until the indignation be past. So if the tribulation is 7 years in length, first 42 months is the wrath of the Lamb, last 42 months is called the wrath of God, then we can understand that the righteous have to be in heaven. Jesus said, where I am, there you may be also. So the righteous have to be in heaven with the Lord, protected during this time of indignation. Now here again, we're dealing with the catching away of the saints and the resurrection of the dead in Christ in a concept that the English theological word is rapture. Last week we talked about the history of that word. We talked about you can use the phrase gathering together, caught up together, the phrase general assembly from Hebrews 12, and also the phrase translation of the saints. Use any of those phrases if you're uncomfortable with the word rapture. It's simply a theological word used to describe the event. Now, I want to go back over 3 verses here. And 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, 16 through 17 says we're going to be caught up. That's what happens to the living the moment Christ returns. 2 Thessalonians 2, 1 says we are gathered together. That's when the living and the dead meet together in the air, and we immediately go into the heavens. And then Hebrews chapter 12 and 23, I love this, talks about the general assembly of the church of the firstborn, and that is where we meet in heaven. So you got three things here I want you to understand. One is the saints being changed and caught up to heaven. The second term means the living and saints meeting together in heaven in the air. And the third term is the living saints and the dead saints and the angels meeting together in the temple of heaven at the great assembly or the general assembly. So any of these terms or phrases can be used to describe what we use as the English word rapture. All right? Now, let me talk to you for a moment, because I want to go ahead and share this with you again. When you begin to talk about the rapture of the church, and again, I use the term, I could use gathering together or catching away, but there'd be thousands of people watching me saying, what does it mean by gathering together and catching away? The word rapture has been an established theological word to describe the event that occurs in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, 16 through 17, Ephesians 1 and 10, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 and verse 1, and so forth. Now, here's the argument that you hear. And I get letters on this. The rapture is a false teaching. The rapture is heretical doctrine. And I have sat down with people from time to time who taught that, and I would share with them what I'm getting ready to share with you next week. And they looked at me and said, I've never heard anything like this. Nobody ever taught me this, Brother Perry. I always believed that it was heresy from this book that was written. I won't name the man's book, where he traced it back to the 1830s, or a preacher on television that's very well known who says he doesn't believe in it. He thinks it's a modern fabricated doctrine. Now remember this, for someone to say the rapture is a false doctrine is the same thing that the Roman Church said about Martin Luther when he preached the just shall live by faith. It's the same thing that mainline denominations said when the outpouring of the Spirit hit at Azusa Street. They said it was a heresy and a demonic doctrine. It's the same thing that denominationalism said about the great healing revival from 1948 to 1955, when my father, who came out of that era, saw men pray for people in tents. Men in tents pray for people. Let me rephrase that. And garters would fall off of people. Deaf ears would be opened. Blind eyes would be opened. And great miracles would happen. It's the same thing that classical Pentecostals began to say about the blessing teaching that the charismatics brought in the 1980s. I can remember sitting under ministers. That's heresy. And now these classical Pentecostal churches, some of them are having terrible financial difficulty. And I told one the other day, I said, the reason you're having difficulty is I heard you preach for 30 years that God doesn't prosper people. Now, how can you expect to have the blessing of God when you're not telling people God will bless them for their giving? And I'm not trying to rebuke anyone here. I'm simply making an observation. Well, now the preterists and other organizations are telling us that we don't know what we're teaching. We're teaching heresy. We're teaching false doctrine because we're teaching about a rapture of the church. And I will just simply say to you that there is a reason why this teaching resurfaced when it did. How often have I heard somebody say, well, it was in the 1800s that the teaching of the coming of the Lord resurfaced? Well, duh. There's a reason that it resurfaced in the 1800s. Are you ready for this? Why from the 4th century all the way to the 1800s, Matthew Henry, Adam Clark, James Fawcett and Brown, why are these men who wrote these great commentaries don't do a lot of teaching on the coming of the Lord? You want the answer? Here's the answer. Because in the prophecies of the Bible, there's a man called the Antichrist that has to come to Israel, and the Jewish people have to be living in Israel at the time the Antichrist comes, and the Jewish people have to flee out of the city of Jerusalem, and the Jewish people have to be in control of Israel and in control of the city of Jerusalem for the prophecies to begin to come to pass. And from the 4th century to the 1800s, there was no nation of Israel. There were no Jewish people controlling the nation of Israel. There was no reestablishment of the Jews returning from the nations of the earth. There was no city of Jerusalem. It was under Turkish occupation. The Turks had it from 1517 to 1917. Now, you pray tell me, how is anybody supposed to get up and preach the coming of Jesus Christ for the saints and the resurrection of the dead when the coming of the Messiah for the saints and the resurrection of the dead are linked to Israel being a nation, Jerusalem being the capital, the Jews returning from around the world, the land of Israel blossoming like a rose, and the nations surrounding Israel being her enemies wanting to destroy her. That's what the prophecies teach about the time of the end. Now, how could any early father from the 4th century, when Jerusalem had been destroyed in 70 AD, the Jews had been scattered, the Roman occupied the city of Jerusalem, the Romans, the Byzantines,